One of the most misunderstood topics in all of Buddhism, if not the most misunderstood topic, is likely jhana and everything that has to do with it. There are countless practices that interpret jhana in numerous different ways, and it is clear that not all of them can be right in the sense of the suttas, as in that they are leading to liberation. They are way too different for that. While they typically do give you some results in terms of pleasure, they usually lead the practitioner away from insight and away from liberation, even if they feel good. That can happen, and happens quite often. Today I want to give you an overview of the 10 most common myths and wrong views I have encountered over the years concerning jhana and samadhi. And I will proceed in no particular order, so please do not view this as an ordered list. However, we will likely start with the most common wrong view on jhana that likely dates back at least as early as the year 100 of the Common Era in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. In fact, I would not be surprised if people from such a background would view me as a heretic for proposing an interpretation of jhana that goes against the common interpretation portrayed in the Visuddhimagga or in the Vimuttimagga or in basically any commentarial text of the Theravada tradition. And I want to make this very clear. I am not a Theravada Buddhist. I am a Sutta Buddhist. I only go by those texts and ignore everything that came after. Not everything. There are very good teachers that came after, but I do ignore the very popular translations and comments that people usually found base their understanding on. The experienced viewer should know by now that I am of course talking about the absorption style of jhana meditation. But what is that exactly, and why is it wrong? Well, I do not want to talk too much about the whys here, as I have created an entire video about just that topic in the past, so feel free to watch that instead. Anyway, the absorption style jhanas take the descriptions in the suttas and interprets them in a way that shuts out everything but the center of your attention. The practitioner takes a meditation object, like the breath, or ironically, one of the insight contemplation subjects the Buddha suggested, and focus on it, instead of thinking and pondering about it, or knowing something about it. So instead of contemplating the breath or viewing it in a certain way, the practitioner is encouraged to instead focus the attention on the breath. The tricky part is that such practices do yield some results. It is just that those results are devoid of the path. They are not leading to liberation, they are leading to pleasure. And as such, they work for the beginning practitioner's point of view. The problem is, while they are results, they have literally nothing to do with the practice apart from some very early benefits of being harder to distract in meditation. As the average practitioner does not know the goal of the practice yet, they cannot really judge if what they do is right or wrong. How could they? You kind of have to understand what you try to achieve before you can tell if it is working. And that understanding is what the right view kind of is. Before that, any attempt at samadhi has to be at least partially wrong. In this case, however, you would be supremely wrong, at least from the point of view of full liberation of mind. If your view or your goal of the practice you are doing is to feel a bit better and to be a bit more calm in everyday life, then by all means go for it. I'm just talking about those people who truly want to make an end with suffering. But enough on that. This video lists the myths and does not explain or analyze them too much. If you want me to go in depth on one of the myths, feel free to let me know about it in the comments. Yet, this brings us to the second view, which includes 99% of modern jhana practices in one way or another. They all have in common that their jhana revolves and circles around pleasure, around good feelings. The practitioner learns and follows a certain method or technique and is rewarded by pleasure that exceeds the level that they are used to. The pleasure is indeed more sublime, and they are not just, and they do not know about the ultimate goal yet. They mistake it for the ultimate goal, because it is the best thing they have ever experienced in many cases. And while jhana is indeed accompanied by pleasure, that is not the central aspect of it at all. The Buddha even said that jhana is apart from sensual pleasure, and that pleasure of the jhana has nothing to do with that. So from that perspective, you cannot get that pleasure at all. It cannot even be the result of a method or something. Sensuality is not some object that you get or something. Sensuality is your lustful intentions. The suttas are so clear about it. So if you want to get something, then it is sensual. If you value that, then it is sensual. The pleasure the Buddha talked about should better be compared with a type of relief and relief-born joy. You are glad and joyful because you no longer have to rely on such clumsy attempts to generate an unstable sense of safety. Such people sometimes repeat those pleasure recipes for all their lives, not gaining a speck of insight or moving a hint closer to a liberation of mind, to Nibbana. The next myth also originates from the more modern styles of practice. In the Suttas, jhana descriptions typically, but not exclusively, revolve around a monk who is sitting. As a result, people assume that the sitting posture must be an integral part of the concentration practice, of the practice of samadhi, which is a result. It's not a practice, but more on that later. As a result, people assume that the sitting posture must be the thing. Whatever their jhana practice looks like, they almost exclusively do so on the meditation cushion and have no access to it otherwise. And if they have some degree of access outside, it is usually only a fraction of the pleasure that they can gain on the meditation cushion. So the pleasure on the cushion is, for them, always superior to other states. And what those practitioners fail to notice is that the sitting posture should better be regarded as a byproduct of concentration and not as a cause of it. You sit because you have no goals left, and the body has to be in some posture. You simply abide with a mind that has no goals left, that has no craving left. What else could you do but sit? I mean, yeah, you can walk while in jhana, and the Buddha said so many times. But why would you, except for a few hours for the healthy benefits? While the Buddha called the jhanas limitless, those jhanas that the people usually practice on the cushion, that revolve around sitting postures, are usually full of limits and shortcomings, so they cannot be the right samadhis that the Buddha is talking about. If your jhana just stops when you get up, how could it be limitless? Craving is a maker of limits. So if you still feel bad when you get up from meditation, that's not so good of a sign. And this brings us to the next myth, namely that jhana depends on time, posture, and circumstances at all. It is quite often the case that people say that they enter and leave their samadhi, failing to see that right samadhi cannot really be entered or left. It is a way of living without craving. As such, you cannot really enter such a state for a time and then just leave it if you don't feel like it anymore. In fact, when you are truly in jhana, you cannot be fed up with that jhana. That would be a total contradiction. When you are free from craving, you kind of willingly have to reintroduce craving to stop that jhana. You have to willingly abandon that state. First, you give up all views and values, all grief and delight in regard to the world. And then, when you get back up from the cushion, you pick up all those things again? I don't think so. You have been completely free for a few hours and then just pick up your burden again. Why would any sane person do that? In reality, most people are not free at all in their jhana. They have not given up or dropped any value or desire of theirs. They have just created circumstances where craving cannot manifest directly for a while. But that is not freedom, not even temporary freedom. It is just that you kind of sleep in jail and do not experience your imprisonment or something like that. And such a jhana or samadhi follows the way of the world. Everyone can be free like that for a while, but truly giving up a view or value, well, that is hard work and worthy of the noble ones. And technically, if you just give up small views, that is just the practice of virtue. Small values, so to speak. And most people nowadays do not even do that. They just blindly restrain, and they shut out. They do not undermine and uproot. And they also have to uproot the right things if you want to make a Dhamma practice. But enough on that. Let's move on to the next one. The next myth is that all the different methods and contemplations from the suttas are actually different. From my point of view, it would even be quite the speculative view to make any difference between wisdom and concentration at all, between samatha and samadhi. I do not think the suttas support that view, let alone a view that makes something entirely different out of every possible type of samadhi. The suttas do not differentiate between concentration, meditation, and insight meditation. Those are two aspects of the very same thing. You cannot separate them at all. This is very important to keep in mind. Concentration is the result of the other type of meditation. Concentration is gathering all the past factors. And when all the past factors culminate and come together as one, you have cultivated them all sufficiently, they become your samadhi. Is jhana really a super special type of samadhi that is superior to all other types? And if so, why did he not call the last part of the Noble Eightfold Path right jhana? Buddha called it right samadhi. So there's no real difference between the types of samadhi or concentration. The Suttas do not support the interpretation at all. There are all kinds of samadhi that can be right. It is not the specifics of the circumstances that make a samadhi right, but your understanding. The right view is what makes you right, or something right. As such, anything that leads to this passion based on the right view is a kind of right samadhi and a legit vehicle to nibbana. Everything that has the potential to remove the remaining hindrances, the remaining taints. The jhanas are just one way to achieve that out of many. And for some reason, they are the most popular though. And I assume that is because most people struggle with lust the most, and it fades kind of slowly. And jhana is specifically the practice of non-lust. As a result, it makes sense to highlight non-lust as a theme that marks the transition in lifestyle, to put it like that. Because hatred is very painful and quick to fade. And the next myth revolves around a statement of the sutta that states that jhanas are entirely wholesome states. When people hear that, they conclude that all jhanas must be right and that you end up at liberation if you practice them long enough. While it is true that right jhana, it is not true for any kind of jhana. You have to pick the jhana that the Buddha was talking about. In the suttas, there are even a number of cases where wanderers of other sects approached the Buddha and were quite puzzled. They said to the Buddha that they don't understand. They are practicing the first, second, third, and sometimes fourth jhana. And the Buddha did too. What could possibly be the difference? They asked the Buddha on several occasions. Were they practicing some kind of distorted and super wrong jhanas? Well, not according to the suttas. From the content, it seems quite clear that the Buddha never really attacked those people for practicing samadhi wrongly, but he did attack them for not practicing their samadhi paired with understanding. So without the right view, even a technically correct jhana, without even the immediate roots of greed and hate present, can be achieved. You can make lots of progress in basically any tradition without freeing you from samsara. Without the right view, those roots will regrow from avijja, and then you are back to square one. From the ultimate point of view, the entirety of samsara lies between right jhana and just jhana. It is the right view that sets you free in the end. And this brings us directly to the next wrong view. While I said that it is possible to practice jhana that is not right, this is not really the case anymore. When there was a Buddha who spread the Dhamma as much as the Buddha Gautama did, the necessary instructions to make your jhana right are so ever-present that you would only have to stumble upon a single sentence from the suttas to make the breakthrough to the Dhamma, to attain the right view, to become a stream enterer if you did the prior training. My mind that is purified does not need more than that, and usually has just one missing piece of the puzzle to make any jhana the right jhana, so to speak. Yet nowadays, people want to practice jhana from the very beginning, as people painted a rather orgasmic image of such practices. I would even go as far as saying that with readily available instructions, getting to stream entry is 100 times easier than getting even to the first jhana. So if you think that you are a great meditator who is practicing the jhanas, while very aware of the fact that you do not know the way out of suffering, I would be very careful if I was you. Chances are quite good that whatever you practice might be what you call jhana, or might be what some people call jhana, but it is not the jhana of the suttas, or the jhana that the Buddha mentioned. Right jhana is the coming together of the entire Noble Eightfold Path. The path starts with right view, and it culminates in samadhi. Right view comes first, and the Buddha said so many times, and it's very important to keep that in mind. First, there is stream entry, and then whatever you practice culminates in samadhi. And the suttas could not be clearer on that. And this brings us to the next myth. People typically practice such modern jhanas as they have learned them from someone else as a means of preparation for insight. Given such an assumption, it makes total sense to the practitioner in question to do that before stream entry. Yet, how can something be the result of the training for a long time and the preparation exercise for the same thing at the same time? The suttas are quite clear on the position of right samadhi on the path. There isn't really any wiggle room unless you willingly look in a different direction and ignore all the suttas that you do not like, that do not align with your views. Jhana is not something you do. Jhana is not an exercise. It is not a method. It is not a technique. It's not a recipe. It is not something you do. It is not something you can enter or leave just like that when entering or leaving the meditation cushion. Jhana is simply that which happens when you have exhausted the immediate roots of craving. Once you got rid of all your central views, jhana arises. Jhana is a result of your training. Your job as a meditator from then on is to dwell in that state 24/7 until it becomes impossible to leave it. None of that has anything to do with a method that prepares you for insight. It is a type of training. It's a type of dwelling. It's a type of basking and bathing in pleasure. Really, it is. But it has to be the right kind of joy, the right kind of pleasure. It has to be right. And this brings us to the next myth. People are usually of the view that you can attain jhana apart from at least some degree of wisdom and understanding. They really think that it is about techniques and methods on the cushion, and that wisdom is something apart from that. In reality, there can never be any jhana without having some degree of understanding of sensuality and how it comes to be and why it is harmful, why it is dangerous, why it is perilsome, and why you suffer from sensuality. It is just that the ultimate knowledge of the Buddhas can still be missing. Jhana is nothing that happens to you. It is the result of deliberately training and the voluntary giving up of craving. That is something that you actively do. You give up those views and cravings and you undermine those, you remember the danger, you contemplate. Those are things you do. Jhana is not something you do. Jhana is a result, and it requires understanding. Jhana follows based on understanding. The right view comes first, and from that right view and repeated training of the Noble Eightfold Path, right samadhi arises. You cannot accidentally give up craving or your opinions and values. Craving is something that you fuel, that you actively do. How could you stop that by accident? You have to at least understand the process, and based on that you can train your mind for a long time until all cravings are exhausted and the roots are pulled. This simply cannot happen as an accident. It can only be the result of understanding and training. It might be that you do not know the words that I, for example, use or that other people use to describe the entire process, but you have to have understanding on the level of gut feeling, so to speak. You have to have realization. You have to have understood it deep down. And this brings us to the last myth for today. People usually treat jhana as something that happens to them. They treat it as an event, a mythical experience, a magical reward at the end of the method. As long as you think that jhana is something that happens to you, your jhana practice cannot be right. It might be a jhana according to modern teachers, but it is not the jhana that exhausts all the taints. Again, jhana can be attained based on wisdom and rigorous training of the mind. You get there by uprooting and leaving behind all the views and values that you hold, everything that is dear to you. You throw all those things away, and once there is nothing left, nothing that is dear to you anymore, you enter and abide in the first jhana. Yet at any given time before that, you know exactly how to get to that state based on the right view. That is a reason why you can make an effort to get to that goal, because you have understood it. How could you ever get there without knowing where you want to go? You would just be confused and wander in circles pretty much, because there's literally infinitely many wrong views. Samsara is full of them. But anyway, let us now come to the most important points. First, there are countless jhanas for thousands of teachers, possibly. I would not be surprised if there are several hundred different jhanas, and people would quarrel all the time what those factors of the different jhanas are and whatever. But the common thing is that they are pretty much all about pleasure. If people would talk in terms of the absence of craving, all those misunderstandings would cease. That most of those jhanas are wrong and not even any jhana. They are just pleasure that you gain on the meditation cushion. Jhana cannot happen apart from understanding. It is with relief and with relief-born joy, from being free of all obsessions. Jhana is the result and culmination of the path, and not an exercise to get there. And there are so many wrong views when it comes to jhana. It is very difficult nowadays, even with all the suttas and all the instructions available, to practice jhana rightly, simply because sensual pleasures are so readily available, and it is not easy to shelter yourself from that, to really give up craving for good. But anyway, this should be enough for today. If you have any more questions on the topic of jhana, feel free to ask in the comments below or join the Dhamma Hub Discord server. People there are usually very skilled when it comes to such questions and can probably help you understand what jhana really is. But apart from that, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy what I do, feel free to like and subscribe. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and